Hey everybody, and welcome to Epic Everyday, our weekday podcast for busy, overwhelmed Christians who don't want to live in busy, overwhelmed land and instead want to live in freedom and abundance and peace. I'm Liz Ferricks, and this is my husband, Evan.
Hi there.
And we're so glad you guys are here with us on this wonderful Monday Opportunity Day. Woohoo!
Yeah, the whole week's ahead of us, and it's just bursting with opportunity.
As you guys know, our show is a reminder show. We go through the CSCS. They are Tai Chi principles adapted from Peter Ralston's Tai Chi principles that we have found really are the pathway to finding that freedom, abundance, and peace. Mm-hmm. Being calm, surrendered, centered, connected, and complete. Talk about one every day of the week. So since today's Monday, we're going to talk about being calm.
Yeah, and also these few weeks here, we are going through another set of 5 principles.
Our 5 and 5.
Yeah, out of the Dr. May book called Addiction and Grace, and these are 5 principles of a life lived with consecrated intent. And this is all about living a life intentionally and engaging in our consecration to God, which is our apartness from the world and set aside into God and into His kingdom. And so these principles, we've been focused on one a week ever since January 8th. And this week we're going to talk about community. The other principles are honesty, dignity, responsibility, and simplicity. And we'll get into responsibility next week and simplicity the week after that. But we're going to dive into community here, which is one of our favorite topics. We usually talk about connection every Thursday.
You know, we don't even realize how much stress comes from community or not community. But when you think about it, people are one of the major stressors in our lives.
Yeah.
Whether we, have frustrating, stressful relationships or we don't have, healthy relationships to help encourage us and build us up. We are lonely or, whether it's I feel lonely or just I feel so alone, like I have to handle this by myself.
Or,
I feel like that's a little different spin on loneliness, but.
Or we've been hurt and we are trying to avoid getting hurt again. So we can withdraw and avoid people. That's a dangerous spot to be in. Right.
So I think community can be a big source of stress, but it also can really help with stress and overwhelm, Yeah.
I think God by design wants us to be in a community of people that are worshiping Him together and doing certain things together. A lot of the 10 Commandments are about how we deal with one another.
Mm-hmm. You can't do the one another's without one another.
So today we're going to talk about how do we interface with the communities that we're in, because we want to act intentionally there.
Right.
And we want to be ourselves. We want to be autonomous, but we also know we're part of the group, and that's important for the group, and it's important for us.
Right. And we're going to talk about how to find calm in the middle of that.
Yeah.
Because, as I said, sometimes that can be a huge stressor. I think the first thing that came to mind for me was, handling past bad experiences. Because we've talked a lot about emotional compound interest on this show. And if we have had experiences with people who betrayed us, or, if we found people in the church to be hypocritical or untrustworthy.
Yeah.
I know I struggle with that, because of my past experiences, people who are in a church automatically have a negative check mark next to them.
Oh, you're extra cautious, huh?
Right. I do tend to be extra cautious, and that's something that I've had to work through, because there was a while there where it was like, oh, we're going to a church and the people around us are probably going to stab us all in the back,
Dramatic much?
So one way to work through those past things, which we always recommend, is to do tapping on them. Or see a therapist, or, share it with somebody like a pastor or an elder in your church to have someone trustworthy work through it with you. Yeah.
And I guess I would also say, if it's so gone in the past that there's no way to reconcile with this person, or if, I think the ideal one would be to reconcile the relationship, but you can't do that all on your own. It just really depends. But if it's possible to have a confrontation and a reconciliation, that would be great. But, sometimes these are people that you're never going to see again, and you've got to deal with it. And sometimes even just thinking about trying to do a reconciliation is so stressful that you would need to do some tapping and some work on yourself
Right.
before you dive into that pool.
Totally.
And that's fine, but do the work so that we can have good relationships.
Right. So how do we pick trustworthy people to either help us work through our past stuff or to be connected with in the present?
Yeah. Well, there's this thing called safe test, and that's what we want to do, where we it's a way to kind of get your toe in the water and then your foot, and, with the person, and ease into the relationship. We don't want to be so withdrawn that there's no way to really build a relationship beyond saying hi.
Right.
And we don't want to jump into the relationship so headfirst and quick that you're vulnerable and all your ick is right there and the person's like, what?
Right.
But yeah, so this safe test it's pretty simple. I mean, you just try to be, because we're called to be vulnerable and we're called to be honest. Those are some big Christian characteristics, but we can decide how we walk that path with somebody.
So practically, safe tests are just, there's two different things you need to think about. One is who you approach with your safe test, because there's a couple ways to think about that. I mean, you can either just pick a random person that you're interested in for
Maybe
whatever
you like their
reason.
haircut.
Yeah. Somebody that you regularly see, like somebody that you work with or something, and you already have a relationship with them and you're interested in, moving it deeper. So you can do a safe test.
That would probably be the most common one, I would imagine. Like if this
Right.
is somebody at church, this can be done. This isn't like I'm starting a new relationship and this is the only time I can do safe tests. Every stage in the relationship, for it to go forward, there's got to be some mutual vulnerability and honesty and agreement on where the relationship's going. And this is a way to initiate that kind of check to see what the next thing might be.
Exactly.
So yeah, it's probably someone you already know, but it could be a stranger or, a brand new relationship too.
Right. And if you're starting a brand new relationship, one way that I have found is one helpful thing I've found is to watch other people and try to find somebody that's vulnerable themselves. Because you already know then that they are okay with vulnerability. Somebody that's done a vulnerability test with you, or somebody that you saw in a different context, like maybe they shared something in your Sunday school class, or maybe they shared something in church or somewhere else, or maybe it's somebody that you're like, I remember at one of our churches, I had a couple of conversations with this couple, and I was like, oh, they're into a lot of the same things that we are, but they totally didn't realize it. And when we invited them over for dinner the first time, they were like, okay. Like they were just really surprised.
That we invited them over?
Yeah, well, and they were a little bit like, this is awkward and weird because
we were kind of new at the church and they had a lot of friends already. And we're like reaching out to them. Maybe it felt weird, but
I don't know. But then they were like, oh my goodness, like we clicked really well because we were into a lot of the same things. And I saw a lot of the same passions with them because, they were talking about ministry. And so I knew that we shared some of those values.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good idea. I've done something like that. A close friend of mine is actually, that happened. Like I saw vulnerability on his part and at church, and then I was able to then approach and say, I was then vulnerable about the same thing, and we had a connection, and we were able to go on from there. So I think that's great advice because, we don't want to just reach out to people that are just like us, but we're not talking about that. We're talking about having common interests, maybe a common struggle, maybe a common passion, the vulnerability to display that. That's a good thing to pursue.
Right. So when you're dipping your toe in the water, it's kind of like love and logic parenting, where you give your kids two choices, which doesn't matter which choice they pick. Both of them are perfectly fine with you. And that's what you want to do with a vulnerability test. You want to share something that's a little bit vulnerable, but if they reject you based on that, you're like, okay, that's fine. Not a big deal. You want to pick something small. And then another one that I've found to be helpful is trying to schedule hangout time. Because if the other person is impossible to nail down with hangout time, it's probably a symptom that they're not as interested in the relationship as you are. So, yeah, it gives you some good feedback. Just kind of stretching the relationship a little bit and see how the other person responds. All right, well, hopefully that gives us all some things to think about and ways to practically actually do the vulnerability test. You know, we don't have to jump into a relationship. We don't have to go deep with it. We can take it one step at a time. Mm-hmm. And we can test and be like, is this somebody that I want to have a relationship with? Because if it's somebody that's not okay with vulnerability, it's just going to add to your stress because you can't be honest with them. And then you're going to be managing another relationship that's, you know, usually people that can't be vulnerable are probably drainers, you know, aren't working on the things that they aren't working on growing. Yeah. And we want to be with people that are working on growing because we're working on growing ourselves.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and if the test gets passed with flying colors, the relationship can then develop pretty quickly. I mean, you can do another test and another, and eventually it could be a really beautiful thing quickly. You know, if you're missing, if you need relationships and you need that kind of accountability and that closeness, but you don't really feel like you have any friends, if you find the right person, you can get there. You know, it's not like this is a 10-year process or something.
We love you guys, and we're praying for you. Thanks to everybody that's been sharing the show. We really appreciate it. If you have found this podcast helpful, please do continue to share it with people. And come back tomorrow, and we're going to talk more about community and how surrender plays into that.
Thanks for listening. We'll talk to you guys later.
Yep. Have an awesome Monday.